All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. So thanks for joining us. I'm Dan Lee, and I'm here with Vitaly Borshan, and we are the co-founders of Solomon Admissions Consulting. We'd like to welcome you to this presentation on the college personal statement and perfecting your narrative. So one thing I'd like to point out is, as we're going through the slides, you can type questions into the chat box for me to answer at the end of the presentation. And so you can type those questions. If you have questions on specific slides, you can go ahead and type those in real time, and I'll be able to answer those at the end of the presentation for everyone to hear. And the other thing I want to point out is that at the end of the presentation, we are going to go over a sample essay that incorporates a lot of the points from the slides. It's really important to stick around for that, just because it's it's a very important part of kind of showing you how everything is put together once you have all the elements of the college personal statement put together. All right, so like I said, I'm Dan Lee, and I'm here with Vitaly Borshan. Both of us graduated from Georgetown Law School. We have over a decade of college admissions consulting experience, getting applicants into the top 20 and top 15, top 10 schools in the country. And over the past decade, our success rate is pretty high. We've gotten, for the most part, over 90% of our students get into one of their top 3 choice colleges. So the first question you might want to ask is, why should you care? A lot of you are applying to college this fall. Things have gotten significantly more competitive in the last decade. The average acceptance rates at pretty much all the Ivy League schools and the other top 10, top 15 schools that are not Ivy League have dropped by at least half, and in some cases, much more than half. If you look at a school like Vanderbilt, their acceptance rate's gone from a decade ago where it was about 42% to now where it's close to 11 or 12%. And so things have gotten dramatically more competitive. And for the most part, one thing to keep in mind is that a lot of people who apply to the top schools, they look very similar on paper. So it's very common for students who have a 4.0 GPA and close to a 2400 SAT to get rejected left and right at all the top schools. That's very common, and that's something that we see a lot in our field of work. One thing to keep in mind is that if you are, I'll take an extreme example, if you're looking at a Harvard, Yale, Princeton, or Stanford caliber school, Harvard, Yale, Princeton, and Stanford reject over 60% of applicants who have both a perfect 4.0 GPA as well as a 2400 SAT. And you keep in mind that these students, for the most part, they have very strong extracurriculars as well. And so this just goes to show that there's nothing that's a guarantee in admission these days. I'm going to go over the average acceptance rates at some of the top schools that a lot of our clients apply to and get into. So the first column is the school. The second column, entitled Average 2005, is the average acceptance rate at those schools a decade ago in 2005. And so, for instance, the average acceptance rate at Columbia a decade ago was 12%. The column labeled Average 2014 is the average acceptance rate at those schools this past year. So, for instance, the average acceptance rate at Columbia this past year, it was only 6.9%, and that's almost a 50% drop from a decade ago. The column entitled Solomon Admissions is the acceptance rate of the clients that we work with. And so, for instance, this past year, our clients that we worked with who applied to Columbia University, 28.2% of them got into Columbia University. And in case you're wondering how big that data set is, we work with, on average, anywhere from 90 to 110 students a year. And typically, most of the 100 or so students we work with every year apply to some combination of the top 20 schools. And so for all the schools that you're looking at a minimum of 30 students, who applied, but in most cases closer to 40 or 50 students who applied to each of these schools. And so 28.2% would be the percentage of those 30 to 50 students on average who got into the school in question that we worked with. So I'll just go take you through a couple other schools. If you look at Stanford a decade ago in 2005, the acceptance rate at Stanford was 13%. This past year, the acceptance rate at Stanford was 5.1%. And this past year, 23.1% of the students we worked with were accepted at Stanford. And the last one I'll go over really quickly is the University of Pennsylvania. A decade ago in 2005, the acceptance rate at UPenn was 29%. This past year, the average acceptance rate to Penn was 9.9%, and 36.5% of the students that we worked with got into UPenn this past year. So the next question you want to ask is, how does your personal statement impact the admissions decision? For the most part, when you're applying to an Ivy League school or to a place like Stanford or MIT, they give you two ratings when they evaluate your application. The first rating is an academic rating, and it's typically, depends on the school, it can be on a 1 to 9 scale, 1 to 5 scale, depending on the school. And the academic rating is basically composed of your SAT-1 or ACT score and your SAT-2 scores, which compose half of your academic rating or 25% of your overall rating. And the other half of your academic rating is composed of your grades, your class rank, and your course difficulty. And that your grades, your class rank, and your course difficulty typically comprise 25% of your overall rating or half of your academic rating. So the second rating that you are given at an Ivy League school or at a place like Stanford or MIT is that you are given a personal rating. The personal rating encompasses your essays, your extracurricular activities, and kind of it's a more subjective rating. It takes into account what these elite schools feel that you would bring or contribute to the incoming class. The personal rating can be broken down into two separate components. If you look at the chart on the right, the pie chart on the right, the half of the personal rating consists of your personal statement, which is typically the Common App main essay for most schools. The supplemental essays, which are school-specific supplemental essays, for instance, if you apply to Cornell, they ask you why you want to go to Cornell, what you want to major in. Same thing with UPenn. They ask you why you want to go to Penn, what you want to major in. Some schools like Stanford weight the supplemental essays much more heavily than simply, this subcomponent 25% rating. At a place like Stanford, the supplemental essays are rated weighted much more heavily than the other components of the application. And at also the 25% of your overall rating consists of, in addition to your personal statement and your supplemental essays, what we call an addendum. And most students fail to write an addendum. An addendum is simply a paragraph or two that explains any anomalies in your academic record. So a lot of students who end up getting a B one semester and they have all straight A's otherwise, if they don't explain that B away, people just assume the worst. They either assume that you're lazy or you don't care, and if you don't explain it in an intelligent way, then you're going to get docked points for that. And so that's about 25% of your overall rating. The other 25%, which we also help applicants with, so consists of your activity sheet. It's called a brag sheet. This is separate. In case you're wondering, I'm sure a lot of you maybe have seen the Common App. For those who have not filled out the Common App, there's a section on the Common App where you can list your top 10 extracurricular activities. That is not the brag sheet. The brag sheet is separate from that section on the Common App because of the fact that the Common App has a character limit, and so you're not really able to describe extracurricular activities in depth. And because of that, you can just you need to submit a separate brag sheet that outlines your extracurricular activities in detail and exactly what you did. And the brag sheet can range in terms of number of pages, anywhere from 7 pages to 20 pages, although we encourage most students to trim down the brag sheet just because, like I said, the reader has limited time and you don't want to give them too much material. Your rating is also determined by your interview. We prep a lot of students for mock interviews. And we know exactly what the evaluation sheet looks like that your interviewer has, because a lot of us have personally been alumni interviewers. And so for the most part, you want to max out that evaluation, because that goes back to the admissions committee, and that can affect your chances of getting in or not. The last component that we work with students on improving is their letters of recommendation. A lot of people are under the impression that you just ask your recommender to write a letter and they will kind of take care of everything, and that couldn't be further from the truth. I can tell you from personal experience, from having read a lot of recommendation letters, that over 90% of recommendation letters are very poorly written, and they actually do not help your candidacy. And now by that, I don't mean that they say anything negative about you. For the most part, they say very positive things, but they tend to be very generic, and that's not what they're looking for. So a large part of what we do is we help students meet with their recommenders and figure out exactly what to say in their recommendation letters. So now we're going to talk a little bit more about the personal statement in general. It's really your one and only chance to stand out from the crowd of other students who have perfect GPAs and perfect test scores, and most of those students do get rejected at the top schools. People on the admissions committees or AdComs will present your application to committee for a vote on whether to accept or reject you or waitlist you, largely based on your essays. And that's very important, because when you have just an overwhelming number of students who are qualified to go to a Harvard or Princeton or Stanford, at the end of the day, it comes down to a personal touch. And so you really, if you don't make a personal impact on the reader through your essays and through your application, there's really no reason for them to accept you, because they reject people with perfect scores and great extracurricular activities all the time. So you really have to give them a reason to accept you, and that's where the personal statement comes in. It's the personal touch that kind of seals the interview in a lot of ways. The next thing to keep in mind is that your personal statement is a marketing tool, and it's a marketing tool that's meant to answer the following question, and that question, which readers on the admission committee are actively asking themselves as they read your application, is, why must we let you in? Why must we let you in? And so, once again, that goes back to the fact that there are way more qualified candidates than there are seats, and they are looking for people who are very compelling on paper, and you have to make that case for yourself in a very, very passionate way. Otherwise, they're simply not going to let you in. And the last point I like to stress again is that your personal rating, which is half of your rating. One rating is your academic rating. The other rating is your personal rating. Your personal rating is determined in large part by your essays. It influences how the admissions committee views your level of passion for your extracurricular activities. It influences how they view whether you bring a different perspective to the incoming class or not, and it impacts many, many different aspects of your application. And like I said, your essays determine in large part your personal rating, and they can determine in large part your academic rating as well, and we'll go into that later. So the next question you want to ask is, what does my essay need to accomplish? So I want to point out 5 different things that your essay really, really needs to accomplish or include. So the first thing is what I like to call slice of life essays. Slice of life essays are by far the most memorable essays. And so what do I mean by a slice of life essay? A slice of life essay is simply an essay that takes one small aspect of your life, not all encompassing, but something that's very specific about your life. And it talks about a very narrow aspect of your life, but it allows the reader to have kind of a window into your soul or into your life through that narrow aspect of your life. And so one mistake a lot of applicants make is they write an essay that's very broad and just all-encompassing, and those really are not the best essays. The best essays are the ones that focus on a very small aspect of your life, but that reveal a tremendous amount about you through that small aspect. The second goal that you should keep in mind with your common application main essay is that the essay should apply only to you and to no other applicants. Your goal is to be the one-line applicant. And so what do I mean by that? Readers on the admissions committee, when they discuss certain applicants, they love applicants who are the one-line applicants. And so a one-line applicant is someone who is incredibly memorable, who stood out from the crowd, and who made an impression on them because of the fact that they were very different and because of the fact that their application was original and incredibly well written. And so an example of a one-line applicant would be, oh, well, what do you guys on the committee think about that great kid from Dallas who wrote his essay about being a debate champ, but also tied that into his love for study of classics. That type of essay is not commonly written, just because not that many people major in classics, and so because of that, that person would be memorable to people on the admissions committee. The third thing to keep in mind is that the essay must emotionally engage the reader and take them on an emotional journey. So typically, your typical reader on the admissions committee is someone who, for the most part, I don't want to overgeneralize, but they tend to not have gone to the best schools. They tended not to be the best students when they were in high school. And they're reading hundreds of applications over the course of a few days or a few weeks. And they're bored and they're tired. And so if you don't, if they've read 20 essays that are bad, and like I said, 90% of essays written by 4.0, 2400 SAT students, at least in my experience that I've read, are not good. And so it's one of those things where the readers desensitize, and so they're so tired of reading the essays that if you don't emotionally engage them, then their natural reaction is going to be to not get behind your application. The fourth thing to keep in mind is that the essay must showcase a unique point of view that no other student brings to the incoming class. That's a very important point. The admissions committees are building a class. Part of building a class is not only bringing together people from different backgrounds, but bringing together people who have unique points of view that a lot of other applicants do not bring, And so you need to really showcase what that point of view is in your essay. And if you don't, you're hurting your application. And the last goal to keep in mind is that the personal statement or essay must reinforce your overall positioning strategy and the theme of your application. And so what do I mean by that? The best applications have an overarching theme. So an example would be, let's say, an applicant did work in environmental engineering and they're interested in conservation. Well, that needs to really be the push for your entire application. And so your recommendation letters, your personal statement, your supplemental essays, your activities, everything must kind of focus on that aspect of wanting to be a conservationist and wanting to study environmental engineering. And so the best applications are the ones where there's an overarching theme that runs throughout, number one, and number two, where that overarching theme is showcased at a high level in every element of your application, going from your personal statement to your supplemental essays, to your recommendations, to your activities. Everything has to tie together, and there has to be a cohesive theme. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is strategic positioning. And strategic positioning is, this is probably the most important thing we do with most of our clients. Strategic positioning is incredibly important. The reason we're discussing it is that strategic positioning directly impacts what you write in the essays, because the essays have to be about whatever your strategic positioning is. And the strategic positioning also has to tie into your one or two main extracurricular activities, as well as your recommendation letters. And this is really, strategic positioning is simply a way for making your application stand out and look different from everyone else who's applying, who looks like you on paper without the essays, but for the most part, most of them are going to get rejected, and so you have to really stand apart from your competition. So making you stand out. Positioning one's strengths against an institution's weaknesses. So I don't know how many of you are watching the French Open or follow tennis. I'm a big fan of tennis, and so the tennis analogy for strategic positioning would be, if Nadal is playing Federer, obviously, Nadal's left-handed, Federer's right-handed. Nadal's got a wicked left-handed forehand that he sends to Federer's weaker one-handed backhand all the time to break down his backhand. That's kind of the tennis analogy for strategic positioning. You're lining up your strengths, in this case Nadal's forehand from his left hand, against an institution's weaknesses, which would be, in this case, Federer's weaker one-handed backhand that tends to break down. So an example of that would be that it would actually be more advantageous for someone who's an engineering whiz with a lot of science awards to market his or her strong engineering background at a school like Yale, where not as many engineering majors apply, and Yale doesn't necessarily have the strongest engineering department, versus marketing that strong engineering background at a place like MIT, where he or she would blend into the crowd. I'm going to talk a little bit about strategic positioning and building a class. So admissions committees are building a class, and they're actively doing this as they're reading your application. And so what does that mean? That means that the top colleges are looking for well-rounded incoming classes. The top colleges are not looking for well-rounded students. And that's very important to remember, because they're looking for instance, if you're applying to Harvard and you play the piano, they're going to be asking themselves, have you soloed at Carnegie Hall? If you are applying to Harvard and you want to study physics or mathematics, they're going to ask themselves, did you qualify for the U.S. Math Olympiad team, and have you done mathematics research? They're really looking for people who are the best at one thing and who are specialists, and who have national awards in whatever they're doing. So the key question you have to ask is, who are you going to be in the incoming class? Who are you going to be in the incoming class? And that's a very important question to ask, because if the person you think you're going to be in the incoming class could apply to a lot of other people who are equal or better than you in terms of accomplishments, you're simply not going to get in. And so part of building a class is asking who you're going to be in the class, but more importantly, that gives you a window into how you should strategically position your application, because if you position it in a way where, let's say you're good at computer science and you're applying to MIT, well, guess what? There's going to be a lot of people applying to MIT who are better at computer science than you. And so because of that, that may not be the smartest way to market your application strategically at a place like MIT. The next question to ask is, what talent or perspective do you bring to the incoming class that no one else brings? And that, once again, goes back to point of view. They're looking for people who bring a very different point of view to the incoming class, and you have to really express that eloquently through your essays. And the last thing they're kind of asking in the back of their heads when they're building a class is, do you have the potential to be a future leader in your chosen field? A lot of schools, especially a place like Stanford, really emphasizes this question. A lot of the top schools, they're really looking to see who you're going to be 10, 15 years from now. If you're going to be someone who is famous or well-known in the field, and if you're going to be someone who takes the Harvard, Princeton, Stanford name and makes it bigger and bigger, they're really, really looking for that, and you need to communicate that in your application in order to get in. So now I'm going to go through 2 case studies of strategic positioning. So case study number 1, the applicant is a recruited athlete. And so admissions committees typically view recruited athletes as only adding sporting prowess to the incoming class. Typically, a lot of the recruited athletes we work with who apply to the Ivy League, their essays initially that they write, they typically like to talk about the winning shot in sports, or they like to talk about sports in general, and they typically don't address what else they would bring to the incoming class. A lot of times they don't address intellectual or leadership talents, and that can be a problem. And so the strategic positioning or strategy to get around that problem would be to center your personal statement on what impact intellectually and in terms of extracurricular activities that the recruited athlete would have on the incoming class outside of sports. Example number 2 is a common client that we get a lot, especially junior year, early senior year, is an applicant with great numbers who's well-rounded, but they don't necessarily have that one thing that they're the best at. And so that can be problematic because admissions committees at the top schools typically don't like admitting well-rounded students into their incoming class. They want, as I touched on before, they're really looking for specialists who are the best at one or at most 2 things, And so the way to get around that is that when we work with applicants on their strategic positioning or working on their Common App main essay, the analogy I like to use is that it's like it's kind of like being a film director in a lot of ways. You're shooting a bunch of different scenes. You're shooting literally 300 hours of footage and you're condensing that into 3 hours to make the movie. And so you can shoot the same footage, and the footage in this case would be, your extracurricular activities, kind of the things that you've done, what you bring to the class. And depending on how you splice the film at the end to condense it to 3 hours, you can create a completely different movie from the same scenes that you shot. And so the strategic positioning to get around someone who's well-rounded would be simply to center your personal statement on a singular passion or intellectual pursuit that makes the applicant seem more focused and more specialized. And so you can do that even if you're well-rounded, but you have to do it in a very artful and intelligent way. So the next thing I'd like to touch on is special considerations for Asian American and Indian applicants. And I bring this up because about 50% of the applicants that we work with and we help out are Asian American and Indian, and they face a unique set of challenges when applying to Ivy League schools as well as other top 10 or top 15 schools. There's definitely a heightened bar for Asian American Indian applicants. You can read about it in recent press coverage. Here are a sampling of different articles that are in the New York Times or the Atlantic that discuss the issue. If you're so interested and want to read up more on it after the presentation. So there was a study done in 1997, and this study looked at applications at several Ivy League schools, and it compared Asian American and Indian applicants to the rest of the applicant pool. And so what this study found is that given similarly qualified applicants in terms of GPA, SAT scores, and extracurricular activities, it was statistically shown that relative to equally qualified Asian and Indian American applicants at lead colleges, that number one, similarly qualified white applicants were 3 times as likely to be admitted as similarly qualified Asian and Indian American applicants. Number two, similarly qualified legacy applicants. So legacy applicants simply means if your mom or dad went to Harvard and graduated, then and you apply to Harvard, then you would be a legacy applicant. So similarly qualified legacy applicants were 6 times as likely to be admitted as similarly qualified Asian and Indian American applicants. And that's important to remember just because a lot of legacy applicants, the majority of them tend not to be Asian or Indian. The third thing is that similarly qualified recruited athletes at the Ivy League and other top schools are 20 times as likely to be admitted as similarly qualified Asian and Indian applicants. So there was another study done in 2009, and it said that to be accepted to top private universities, Asian American students need on average an SAT score which is 140 points higher than white students. What the study fails to mention is that Asian American students and Indian students also need, the bar is also higher for extracurricular activities as well relative to white students. It's not just the SAT score. Over the last 20 years, the percentage of Asian American students at Ivy League universities has remained the same at 17 to 20%, when in fact the percentage of applicants who are Asian American has actually gone up. And so in comparison, the percentage of Asian Americans at UC Berkeley, where it became illegal to consider race admissions, has jumped to 45%. This next chart shows the percentage of the Asian enrollment percentage at Ivy League schools as well as Caltech. The black dotted line you see at the top, where it ends up saying Asians age 18 to 21, it shows kind of the increase in the the percentage of applicants who are Asian to these colleges. The line at the top that goes up from 20% to 40%, close to 40%, is the enrollment of Asian American students at Caltech. So the enrollment of Asian American students at Caltech has gone up proportional. The increase has been proportional to the increase in the percentage of Asian American applicants. And the other lines at the bottom are the percentage of Asian American students that make up the enrollment at Ivy League schools, and you can see that they're all below 20%. And so the enrollment at the Ivy League schools has not reflected the increase in the number of Asian American applicants. Part of building a class is, I'm going to talk briefly about engineering admissions and building a class, because when A school like Cornell, Duke, Columbia, UPenn, and Carnegie Mellon, places like that where engineering admissions is separate from arts and sciences, there's a lot of social engineering going on. And there's a lot of social engineering going on because these schools want to have a 50-50 male-female ratio in the engineering department, and they also want to promote underrepresented minorities in engineering. And so the net effect of that is that, especially if you are an Asian or Indian male applying to engineering and you're highly overrepresented both in terms of gender and race, well, then the bar for you to get in is much higher. And for the most part, most Asian and Indian applicants to engineering departments are held to the highest standard, much higher than even Asian and Indian female students. And so that's something to keep in mind. Asian and Indian students on average make up 58% of the US Math Olympiad winners, 75% of the Computing Olympiad winners, and 64% of Science Talent Search finalists. Since enrollment percentages stay the same, it means that Asian and Indian applicants are being evaluated not as individuals, but against thousands of other ultra-achieving Asian and Indian students. This is very important to keep in mind because they're building a class. The class has to be diverse, and so there is an artificial cap on the number of Asian Indian students they accept. And so because of that, you're not being compared against other white applicants. You're being compared against other ultra-high-achieving Asian and Indian applicants, and that's why you hear all these crazy stories about Asian Indian students with perfect numbers getting rejected all the time. Asian and Indian males are the most overrepresented in science, math, and engineering, and as a result, they have the toughest challenge in admissions, far tougher than even Asian and Indian female students, and they must be in the top third to top quarter of the incoming class, or they simply won't get in. And that's not just in terms of numbers; they have to be in the top quarter to top third extracurricularly as well. Here's a quote from a former Ivy League admissions officer. The quote is, quote, "So if you come off as just another Asian math genius with no personality, then it's going to be tough for you. An admissions officer is not going to push very hard for you," unquote. And that is actually a true published quote. So here are some common perceptions that elite colleges have of many Asian and Indian applicants. The first common perception is that Asians are notorious for being pre-professionally oriented, often majoring in a small subset of fields, pre-med, engineering, or finance, consulting / business. And I can tell you from my experience, I'm Asian American, and having worked with hundreds of Asian American students over the last decade, the majority of students who come to me, I ask them, what do you want to major in? What do you want to study? And I would say 99% of them either want to be a doctor, an engineer, or go into business or finance. The second common perception that admissions committees have is that Asians tend to have a homogenous set of extracurricular interests, such as stereotypically Asian extracurriculars like tennis, violin, and math team. I did all three of those in high school. Unfortunately, Harvard isn't going to want 400 Asian pre-meds or engineers who excel at piano, tennis, math in its freshman class of 1,600 people. Harvard is building a class, and 400 Asian pre-meds or engineers are not on the list of goals. That's very important to keep in mind when you do strategic positioning, because you have to ask yourself, if you are Asian or Indian and you want to be a doctor or engineer, how do you stack up against the other Asians and Indians who are high achieving who want to be doctors and engineers? And that's a very important question you have to ask yourself. The third common perception that a lot of admissions committees have is that Asian students are viewed as quiet, diligent students who don't rock the boat. Unfortunately, this is not what the Ivy League schools and other elite colleges are looking for. They're not looking for quiet, diligent students. And the problem is that far too many essays and recommendation letters reinforce this stereotype. And if they reinforce the stereotype, you're going to have a very, very hard time getting in. So here's I'm going to go through two case studies, two different Asian American students who came to us either after they were rejected or after they applied early decision and they were deferred. So the first student is an Asian male applying to engineering, and he came to us for help after being deferred by Columbia Engineering after applying early decision. And so by that point, he'd already submitted a subpar application, and he was eventually rejected by Columbia. His GPA was 4.0 out of 4.0, unweighted. He was ranked #1 in his class at a highly competitive public school in the Northeast, and he took the most difficult AP course load, and he was #1 in his class. His SAT score was a 2340 out of 2400. And his extracurricular activities, he was a Siemens semifinalist. He was a ICEF finalist. He published research in engineering with a professor. He was class president. He was on the varsity tennis team. He was a first violinist in the All-State Orchestra, and he was an Eagle Scout. And he also founded the ecology club at his high school. So as I already pointed out, he applied to Columbia early decision and then was deferred and rejected. Then he came to us on December 15th with the January 1 deadlines right around the corner for regular decision at all the top schools. So what were his weaknesses? The weaknesses of his application were his essays. His essay originally talked about his research in robotics. And as you know, strategic positioning, if you're doing research in robotics and you want to be an EE or CS major, well, guess what? You're being compared against other high-achieving Asian and Indian students who do research in robotics who also want to do EE or CS, and a lot of them are going to be more accomplished than you. And so that was one of the main problems, is that his essay talked about that. And not only did his essay talk about his research, it talked about his research in a very dry and uninteresting way. And like I said, you're writing your essay for a educated, non-technical audience, so the average person has an English degree. They don't understand what a MEMS device it is. They don't understand most things about robotics, and so you simply can't write a very technical essay and expect to get in. And also his packaging and his presentation were horrible. And they were horrible because of the fact that he strategically positioned himself incorrectly. He put himself in direct competition with other high-achieving Asian and Indian students in the most competitive subfield, one of the most competitive subfields, which is EECS, that Asian students like to major in. So what we did with his application is that we pointed out the fact that the ecology club is a very unique thing. The conservation movement in the U.S. is something like 99% white, and so not many Asians get involved with conservation. And so we centered his application around conservation and ecology and had him apply to environmental engineering instead. And because of that, he was accepted at Cornell Engineering. The second applicant was a Indian male applying to engineering who came to us for help after reapplying during his gap year. So gap year is simply a year that you take off between the end of your senior year and the start of your freshman year of college. And this student in particular took a gap year because he didn't get into the schools he wanted. So when he applied as a senior in high school, he was rejected from all 8 Ivy League schools, plus his other top choice schools as a high school senior. So he was rejected at Stanford, MIT, everywhere. His GPA was a 3.98 out of a 4.0 unweighted. He was ranked number 3 in his class at a highly acclaimed private school, which sends a lot of kids to Ivy League schools. And he took the hardest course load. He took the hardest AP course load. His SAT was a 2370 out of a 2400. This student happened to be an ICEF finalist. He was a nationally ranked chess player. He was ranked in the top 100 in the country. He was a U.S. Math Olympiad team qualifier. He was the mock trial team captain, and he was a hospital volunteer. And so originally he was rejected from all 8 Ivy League schools, rejected by Carnegie Mellon, rejected by Duke, rejected by MIT, Stanford, Caltech, and Johns Hopkins. So what were the weaknesses? The weaknesses were the same. I mean, his essays were horrible. I mean, they talked about, his essay talked about the Asian immigrant experience and kind of his parents making sacrifices and him wanting to kind of make them proud. That's a great story, but unfortunately, Harvard and the other top schools get about 3,000 to 4,000 essays every year that tell that exact same story. So once again, strategic positioning. If you look like everyone else, you're going to get the same results as everyone else. You're going to get rejected. And so he had a huge problem with packaging and presentation. So what did we do? During his gap year, this student happened to have an interest in political science, and he was obviously very strong quantitatively. So what we had him do was we had him do research in political science, but from a quantitative standpoint. So he did operations research / statistical modeling of different phenomena in political science, looking at political trends, looking at political campaigns. We completely had him rewrite his essay. Instead of talking about the immigrant experience, his essay talked about being a contrarian thinker, someone who challenges convention, challenges authority, and someone, it was obvious to the admissions committee that he would be someone who would be very vocal in class and challenge his classmates, which is exactly what they're looking for. And when he reapplied, with our help, he was actually accepted to Columbia, UPenn, Berkeley, and to Carnegie Mellon. So now I'm going to talk about personal statement best practices. So when the admissions committee reviews your essay, you have to keep a couple things in mind. Number one, the personal statement is not your typical high school essay. Let me say that again. It's not your typical high school English essay, where the teacher is only concerned with your knowledge of the pertinent facts. This is very important to keep in mind because the Common App main essay is not like any type of writing you've ever done. It's not an English paper. They're not, it's not being read by an English teacher. It's being read by someone who is tired, really bored, and really doesn't want to read your essay. And so for the most part, it's a different standard that applies because you have to entertain the reader. Getting an A essay in English is easy. Anyone can do it. Your goal with your Common App main essay is much more than that. You want to take the reader on an emotional journey. You want to make them laugh. You want to make them cry. You want to make them really get behind your application. That is much more difficult than writing an A essay in English. The second thing you want to keep in mind is that the college admissions essays are read by overworked and tired admissions officers in an incredibly short amount of time, often, a couple minutes at most, and probably at a late hour during the day. And so once again, you have to entertain your reader. You have to make them laugh. You have to make them like you. Otherwise, they simply won't get behind your application. So it's a much different criteria for what the essay needs to accomplish. If you can't catch their attention and impress them after they've read hundreds of other essays over the last few weeks, then you've lost. That's very important to keep in mind because to them, you really are just another number. And so they don't really have a whole lot of sympathy for your application. And so if you don't catch their attention, if you don't entertain them and take them on an emotional journey, they're not going to get behind your application, and they have a tremendous amount of influence over who gets in. So you have to keep that in mind. So the question is, how is that achieved? We'll discuss this below. Very, very important slide. So this slide discusses cliche essay topics that you absolutely must avoid. These are topics that you cannot write your Common App main essay about ever. So the first one is probably the worst one out of the entire group, and it's the worst one because the largest percentage of applicants who come to us with their own written essays, this is the one they write about the most, and it's awful. The worst type of essay to write is what I like to call an outward bound trip essay abroad. This outward bound trip essay abroad that taught you about hardship and conversely about how fortunate you are in life. That essay gets read probably about 10,000 times by admissions committees, and they absolutely hate it. So if you write an essay about an outward bound trip, you're most likely you're not doing yourself a favor. Let's put it that way. The second essay topic you want to avoid is writing about the death of a relative. This is also another very common topic that a lot of admissions officers hate reading about, and they don't like reading about it because it's a personal statement about you. It's not supposed to be about your relative, and so the trap that a lot of these essays fall into when you talk about the death of a relative, it says a lot about your relative, but doesn't say a lot about you necessarily. The third type of essay you want to avoid is talking about, and we've covered this already, a winning shot in sports or any essay about sports. And sometimes non-recruited athletes come to me, and in some cases, I've had Asian applicants come to me and say, "Listen, Dan, I play water polo or I play basketball. Can I be like, can I be like the Jeremy Lin of Harvard when I apply? Isn't that unique?" I tell them, yeah, that's unique. It's different, but you still can't write your essay about that, unfortunately. The fourth type of essay that I touched on already, because a lot of immigrants, especially Asian and Indian immigrants, they make this mistake. They write an essay about the immigrant experience story, and it's a great story. It's a story about overcoming language barriers, discrimination, and struggle, as well as fulfilling your parents' dreams. In fact, a lot of students write that essay. And it's a genuinely touching story because mom and dad came over with nothing. They run a grocery store. They work 20 hours a day to put you through the best opportunities and give you an opportunity to go to an Ivy League school. You got to keep in mind the reader is very desensitized, so they read 3,000 to 4,000 of those exact same essays every year. And after the first after the 2000s immigrant story essay, they're sick of it, and so they're going to reject you if you write about that. And so, unfortunately, that's not the best topic to write about, even though in a lot of cases it is a touching story. Another type of essay that you absolutely want to avoid, and a lot of students make this mistake. A lot of students who have no clue what to write about, what they do is they come up with this great idea where they simply want to summarize their own resume or their main extracurricular activity in paragraph form. So like paragraph 1 will talk about the club they started. Paragraph 2 will talk about like the events they had in October and December, and those are really the worst types of essays, because the brag sheet that you compose on your own is there for a reason, and like I said, you can't be repetitive. You have to tell the reader something new about yourself, and you have to entertain them. The last topic that you should absolutely avoid is writing about a topic or issue close to your heart, but failing to address what it says about you. And the reason an example of this would be some students on their comment at main essay, they may write about the fact that they support gay marriage and GBLT rights. That's great, but that doesn't say a whole lot about you, because a lot of people support gay marriage and GBLT rights. And so because of that, we encourage you not to write about topics or issues close to your heart, because a lot of times it really doesn't say a whole lot about you, other than the fact that you're an open-minded person, and they're looking for a lot more than that. So now we're going to go into the semantics of what actually needs to go into the comment at main essay. The first thing is you have to hook the reader. The hook is super important. The first sentence or two of your essay must be spellbinding. It absolutely must be spellbinding. It has to capture the reader's attention, or else they're going to check out mentally. So a successful hook demands the reader's attention, or else the reader will check out mentally. Hooks can be engrossing anecdotes. They can be shocking one-liners, within reason, of course. Or they can be counterintuitive statements. Counterintuitive statement would be, for instance, quote, "The only sound worth hearing is silence," unquote. It's something that turns the reader's head and gets them thinking a little bit, and it catches their attention. So an example of a hook opening that is an anecdote would be the following, quote, "Trapped in a cage, a sleek silhouette darts past the corner of my eye. Momentary calm gives way to sheer terror as a row of serrated 3-inch-long steak knives stare me in the face. With only steel bars and the icy sea separating me from this prehistoric beast, I freeze." That opening is very, very descriptive, and it actually talks about a student's experience diving with great white sharks. Another great opening would be, quote, "I will offer you $250,000 to fund your startup, but on one condition. You must drop out of school," unquote. That would be a shocking one-liner. I want to talk about the tone of your essay. So once again, this is not an English paper. It's not a formal paper. Your tone should be informal. Don't fall into the trap of thinking that the college admissions essay, since it's an important piece of writing, needs to be formal. That's absolutely wrong. This is no place for the formal newspaper article. Going back to what I said about entertaining the reader, you don't want to put the reader to sleep. You don't want them to read a research paper. They are looking to see who you are, get insight into why they should admit you, and so you want to entertain them, and in order to be entertaining, you need to be informal. The second thing to keep in mind, the successful essay will have the author informally speaking to his reader and telling him a story. And that's the other key. Write the personal statement in the first person. You absolutely have to write it in the first person. The reader is much more likely to become engaged in the story if he or she is made to feel that he or she is part of it. Similarly, in general, it's best to have your essay written in the active voice. It makes the essay infinitely more interesting to read, while writing the essay in the passive voice has the unfortunate effect of making the essay seem more remote and academic. Entertain the reader with stories, very important. You have to entertain them. Anecdotes. All successful essays follow this basic form. The author tells the reader a story. Nobody wants to read a dry regurgitation of one's achievements. The admissions officers have seen that already 100 times, if not thousands of times. What they want to read is an interesting story. So give them a good story you yourself would want to read, and they will respond in the best way possible. This is probably the single most important piece of advice when writing your comment at main essay. You make sure you show, don't tell. You have to immerse the reader. So don't just tell the reader about the experience you're describing, but really immerse the reader in the experience by telling an entertaining, descriptive story. Nobody wants to read a dry regurgitations of one's achievements. This is done through descriptive details and through metaphors and similes. You have to entertain your reader, and he or she will in turn, like I said, reward you for it. So a bad example of how to write a statement would be, quote, I picked up my favorite book, Catcher in the Rye, unquote. It's very dry, and you're telling, you're not showing. So here's how you would rewrite that. I picked up my worn copy of Catcher in the Rye, which to me was like that one pair of jeans you're never quite ready to throw away. Same point, but told in a much more interesting way. Note that the first version sounds formal and boring, while the second adds emotion and flavor. It describes the book itself and also gives a comparison, which adds another dimension to the item. With the help of the second statement, we are now much more convinced that Catcher in the Rye is indeed the author's favorite book. Be original in your essay. Don't be cliche. So a cliche statement that's overbroad and overgeneralized would be, this was the most transformative experience of my life. Very, very cliche statement. It's avoid broad, sweeping generalizations about life that could apply to anyone, because anyone could say this was the most transformative experience of my life, and the reader's thinking, I don't believe you, Remove statements you've heard a million times before and then make your eyes roll. The essay has to sound original and not be filled with copy and paste statements. Show, don't tell again. So no unsupportable statements. A common problem many college admissions essays have is the classic unsupported statement. So the essay shouldn't make a general statement about how the author will continue to be hardworking without giving proof of that hard work. So if you say that you learned a lot about leadership, but you don't say what you learned, that's a problem. You have to talk about what you learned if you mention a statement such as, I learned a lot about leadership. As a matter of fact, it's best to not even mention that you're hardworking, but instead to show it by describing your experience working for 1 full year, taking that 1.5 hour commute every day, studying until midnight, and doing long hours on the weekends. That's actually a bad example, by the way. A lot of applicants, what they'll do is they'll write about studying for the SAT or studying really hard in their essay, never ever talk about studying in your essay. So the personal statement is not a resume. The worst essays summarize one's activities or achievements from the resume in paragraph form and bore the reader to death. This presents no new information and irks the reader for wasting his or her time. It provides you have to provide new insights that are not obvious from the resume. And the most important thing I'm going to address finally is the ending. The ending must address the opening or the hook. Think of yourself like, again, I mentioned the film director analogy. You are the film director. And so the opening hook allows you to zoom into the action with your camera. A great ending or great closing zooms the camera out of the scene and completes the narrative by providing closure on the opening scene. And just like with any great movie or any book, you should the great endings always leave the reader wanting more, or the viewer of the movie wanting more. So this is very important. You have to leave the reader wanting more. So now I'm going to go over a sample Stanford essay, Stanford supplemental essay that talks about intellectual vitality. Before our edits, this is the first draft by the student, and then I'm going to go over the edits that we made and the final draft, and the parts that are bolded are the parts that are problematic. So Stanford gives students 3 ratings when you apply to Stanford. They give you an academic rating, they give you a personal rating, and they give you what they call an intellectual vitality rating. And so an intellectual vitality rating is simply their way of saying, listen, does this student have a 4.0 and 2400 SAT because they want to get into Stanford, or do they have a 4.0 2400 SAT because they love learning, And if the answer is the former, you're not going to get in. If the answer is the latter, you may get in, you may not get in, So the prompt is, Stanford students possess an intellectual vitality. Reflect on an idea or experience that has been important to your intellectual development. And here's the first draft by the student. While taking a course on music history, my teacher explained to me the fascinating relationship between history and music. So what's wrong with that statement? There's no hook. It doesn't grab the reader's attention, and it bores the reader, and the reader checks out mentally. He started out by talking about the famous Russian composer, Dmitri Shostakovich. We listened to Shostakovich's String Quartet No. 8, which opens with 3 crashing chords. So what's wrong with that statement? That statement is not showing, and instead of showing it, it's telling the reader what you're doing, and so it's not as entertaining or descriptive as it should be. The teacher explained to us that the 3 chords represent the KGB knocking 3 times on one's door in the middle of the night, and convey the composer's anti-Stalinist political beliefs and sense of oppression. For me, the chords express humanity's fear of losing basic freedoms and human rights, something that no person on this planet should have to endure. What is wrong with that statement? While humanity's fear of losing basic freedoms and human rights is a little bit over-dramatic, it's over-broad, and it's just too much of a generalization. It leaves the reader rolling their eyes. As a result, I began reading additional books on Shostakovich, which revealed to me the heartache and turmoil of Russian history in the 1900s. This experience strengthened my resolve to become a scholar of Russian history. What's wrong with that statement? Once again, it's overbroad and it's overgeneralized, and it leaves the reader rolling their eyes. It's just too much of a stretch. The reader doesn't buy the statement. In addition, my interest in the intellectual aspects of music amplified my understanding of mathematics. I began associating the pitch of certain musical notes on the piano with mathematical key frequencies. So what's wrong with that statement? The reader is an educated, non-technical audience. If they don't know much about mathematics or music, which they, in most cases won't know much about either, they don't know exactly what you're talking about there. You have to explain, you have to support statements with the facts that allow the reader to fill in the details. When I played a scale on the piano, I would associate numbers with each note. Music also impacted my understanding of literature. While watching Apocalypse Now after reading Heart of Darkness, I became obsessed with Richard Wagner's Ride of the Valkyries. I became aware of how Wagner's music was played as anti-Semitic propaganda in Nazi Germany during a class discussion. I hope to pursue my profound passion and interest in music and other academic subjects at Stanford. So that ending is not effective because it does not leave the reader wanting more, and it addresses the opening in a very weak way. So here's the same essay after the full set of edits by our Ivy League graduates who are professional writers. Thump, thump, thump. The bows crash like tsunami waves against the strings of the cello and violin. It's a much more effective hook. It's kind of mysterious, and it's descriptive, and it draws the reader in. Knock, knock, knock. That's the KGB knocking thrice on your door. They want to ask a few questions. When my music teacher explained to me that Dmitri Shostakovich's string quartets conveyed the composer's anti-Stalinist political beliefs and sense of oppression, I was floored. How could a series of 3 dissonant chords convey the fear of being taken away in the middle of the night under a totalitarian regime? So that statement there draws the reader in. It's much more descriptive, and it also poses somewhat of a rhetorical question, which intrigues the reader. Intrigued, I read books about Shostakovich and became versed in 20th century Russian history. It didn't stop there. What other stories could music reveal? What else was I missing out on? So once again, 2 more rhetorical questions that draw the reader in and pique their attention. Soon, my knowledge of each subject I tackled deepened through music. When studying the Fibonacci sequence in mathematics, I no longer saw simply a series of numbers. Instead, I saw the key frequencies of musical notes associated with each number in the Fibonacci series. So that's a supported statement, unlike in the previous essay where the statement was unsupported. Conversely, when playing an A major scale on the piano, I began seeing the Fibonacci sequence. When my English teacher screened Apocalypse Now after we read Heart of Darkness, I became fixated with Richard Wagner's Ride of the Valkyries from the helicopter scene. I learned how his music was employed as anti-Semitic propaganda in Nazi Germany and became proficient in how fascism spread throughout Europe. And so that's important because instead of just talking about the class, it talks more about what you got out of the class. Music has become the score for me to interpret and to become passionate about other intellectual pursuits. That's a much more effective ending. It addresses the opening hook, and it also leaves the reader wanting more. So I'm going to briefly touch on, before I go on to answering questions, I just want to say a few words about what we actually do in case any of you are interested in working with us further. We do one-on-one counseling, and so the details of this are, first off, we work with students on the Common App main essay or their personal statement. And so this includes topic and outline suggestions, 5 edits of the personal statement from our team of Ivy League editors who are professional writers. And I will tell you, we make the personal statement painless for you. Instead of having you write it, what we do is we ask you a list of 30 to 35 questions, and based on that, we basically outline the essay for you and tell you exactly how to write it. And then once you do the first draft or two, we make it infinitely better in terms of presentation and entertaining the reader. And I can tell you this past year, the students who we worked with who got into Harvard and Princeton and Stanford and all the top schools, quite a few of them, when they visited campus for admitted student weekend, the dean of admissions pulled them aside and told them that their essay was incredibly memorable and that everyone on the admissions committee remembered it. And so that achieves kind of the main goal of your essay, which is to be memorable. And I can tell you, for the most part, if you work with us on the personal statement, your personal statement will be in the top 1 to 2% of the applicant pool at all the top schools in terms of submitted essays. The second thing that we work with students on, which is probably the most important thing, is strategic positioning consulting, advising you on how to stand out from the rest of the class. And this is incredibly important because you can write the greatest essay on the planet, but if it's about the wrong topic and your strategic positioning is incorrect, you're not going to get in. And so the majority of students who come to us, especially the ones who come to us as transfer applicants after they didn't get into the school they wanted to as freshmen, they made the mistake of picking the wrong strategic positioning on their own. And I will tell you, most students who do strategic positioning on their own get it incorrectly because, number one, they haven't been on the admissions committee. And if you haven't been on the admissions committee, you may think that, playing the tuba is the way to get into Cornell, when in fact it may not be. I mean, you really don't know, And so if you don't know what the rest of the class looks like, you're not going to know how to position yourself against that. And we've had people who've been on the admissions committee at a lot of different schools, and we know exactly what will work and what won't work in terms of strategic positioning. The next thing we help out with is supplemental essays. So this includes 2 edits per essay. Every school, all the top schools require extensive supplemental essays. A lot of them ask, why do you want to go to Johns Hopkins? Why do you want to go to Cornell? Why do you want to go to Columbia? A lot of them ask very different things. Emory asks you to design a class. Stanford asks you to write a note to your roommate and to also what matters to you and why. We know exactly what every school looks for in their supplemental essays, and if you don't write your essay towards what the school is looking for, your chances of getting in are much lower. The next thing we work with students on is insider information on college preferences. This is very important because, for instance, if you apply to Brown and you apply to Columbia, well, guess what? Brown and Columbia look for very different type of students, and if you don't know what type of student they're looking for, you're most likely not going to write your application correctly to the biases and the preferences of that school, and because of that, your chances of getting in are going to be lowered. Another thing we work with students on is shoring up your weaknesses. This is very important because a lot of students come to us the summer after their junior year or the summer before, or literally a couple weeks before their senior year starts, and they're under the impression that they can't change their extracurricular activities. That's could not be further from the truth. A lot of students I'm working with actually this summer, they came to me, very late junior year or literally a couple weeks ago, and they were on course to not get into, a lot of the schools they wanted to go to, like whether it be Harvard, Stanford, or Cornell. They were just not on course to get into those schools because they picked the wrong extracurricular activities. And so what I did is I'm tweaking their extracurricular activities over the summer and having them do new things so that we can write their application about a completely different topic than what they had done previously. Recommendation letters, very important. All the students we work with, we have them meet with their recommendation letter writers, and we have them sit down and talk to their writers about what their strategic positioning is and what they would like the recommendation letter to say. 90% of recommendations submitted to the top schools are very poorly written, and like I said, if you have a poorly written recommendation letter, it's going to vastly, vastly decrease your chances of getting in, because at the top schools, at a Harvard, Stanford, Princeton, what separates the people who get in from the people who don't is very little, and recommendation letters are a huge part of who gets in. Often the students who get in are the ones who correctly pick out the recommenders and who have the recommendation letter writers talk about very specific things in their letters that the students who don't get in, who have identical numbers, fail to do. Another big thing we do is extracurricular activity consulting. We help you develop a brag sheet. Your brag sheet is a very important part of your application, and it's most students fail to even submit one. And if you fail to submit a brag sheet, you automatically lose a lot of points. And so we help you figure out exactly what to say in that brag sheet, and more importantly, how to say it, because they're looking for very specific qualities in your extracurricular activities If you don't talk about it's not necessarily about what you did, it's about how you talk about what you did. And if you don't talk about it in an intelligent, interesting way, it's not going to help you. Another thing we work with applicants on is mock interview coaching. So a lot of schools you apply to will have interviews. And like I said, the interview forms, we know exactly what the interview forms for all the schools say. And we can coach you on how to maximize your interview so that when the form gets submitted to the admissions committee, that it says the best things possible about you. Another big thing we advise students on is financial aid. So, this goes from everything from applying to grant scholarships to really figuring out how to maximize financial aid to get in. And so, a lot of schools, for instance, Johns Hopkins, Washington University, and St. Louis are what they call need-aware schools. So, if you apply for financial aid, it actually decreases your chances for getting in. We also advise you on financial aid issues if you end up on the wait list. Typically, one of the big factors they look at in pulling people off the wait list is whether you can full pay or not. And so that's very important to consider. So as kind of a bonus for coming to this presentation, we're going to offer $1,000 off any standard package of 5 or more schools in the next 24 hours. So if you're interested in setting up a free 30-minute consultation and potentially signing up for a package in the next 24 hours, you get $1,000 off. So before I go into questions, if you have any questions or things you want to ask us afterwards, or if you want to set up a free 30-minute consultation, you can feel free to contact me at dan.lee@solomonadmissions.com, or you can contact Vitaly at vitaly.borshan@solomonadmissions.com. You can also reach us by phone. We're at 646-470-1096.